Having established a quorum.
Wait a minute, excuse me. A quorum? What did you say? How many members?
50.
Why 50?
That's the quorum number.
That is in the Constitution. 50 is a quorum.
50 what, percent?
No.
50 members.
Out of how many?
It doesn't matter. It's in the Constitution.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. And did you have a breakdown of online versus in person?
Approximately 30 in person. A little more than that online. I'll have that.
Okay. So it's a little hard to count the onlines because there's 2 people on the screen, that sort of thing. But we're at least 60.
Speak louder, please.
I don't think that's working in the church.
Okay, guys.
It's working.
Okay. Woo! Give me a level. Okay. Yeah, okay, is that good? Okay, do I have to be right up on it then? Okay. Will do. I actually went to broadcasting school for a while, so smooth sounds, the night train. So, we are called to order, and Pastor Peter will lead us in prayer.
During this year, we're using the Gospel of John as our lectionary companion, and for those who have worshiped with us today, know that our story today comes from the story of Lazarus. At our forum today, we were blessed to be joined by Dr. Caroline Lewis, who teaches at Luther Seminary and is a John scholar in addition to teaching preaching. And she helped us explore a section of material that we're not actually going to hear in our lectionary in the weeks ahead. We sort of take a big jump between next week and the week following. And so I wanted to, but I share a piece of that part that we won't hear, but if you do your own reading, you'll come across this. And Caroline touched on this morning in our forum. And I've taken just 3 little chunks that you'll see are interconnected here. From John 12, although he had performed many signs in their presence, they did not believe in him. And then Jesus cried aloud, "Whoever believes in me believes not in me, but in him who sent me. And whoever sees me sees him who sent me. I have come as light into the world, so that everyone who believes in me should not remain in the darkness. I do not judge anyone who hears my words and does not keep them, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world." And then from the 13th chapter, when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little while longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the religious leaders, now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." I'm going to repeat that last 2 verses, and I just want us to sit with them for a moment, and then I'll close us in prayer. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. God of love, you call us together to be your church in the world that you have created and placed us within. And you have given us charge to love this world. Help us in our discernment, in our deliberation. Be with us in this place as we seek to discern your will, not our own, but your will. Help us to love one another just as you have loved us. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Let's see, Chris, can you get the agenda slide up again for the folks here and online? A couple of words of kind of announcement and how we're doing things. Those of you online who weren't here earlier for worship did not have an opportunity to get some written handouts that we provided. So my apologies to you. The timing on producing materials for this meeting has been very tight. When we get around to discussion of anything, we have one mic here, and if those of you who are able in the sanctuary, I'd like you to use that mic, but we also have a handheld mic if you are not able, or if it looks like the meeting is going to flow better if you sit where you are. Susan's going to have the mic and can bring it to you. Those of you who are online, Peter, as long as his internet connections hold, will be monitoring your questions and getting you connected to make those points. With that, before we get into the meeting, just a reflection on Peter's prayer. Jesus' words to us as he departed. I'm not a biblical scholar, but someplace else he tells us that he will send a helper. And that helper, we assume, is the Holy Spirit. And I personally experience the Holy Spirit most when I'm in fellowship with people in person like this. So those of you that are not here, I hope that you are blessed with the Holy Spirit moving in you, and that our deliberations reflect the presence of God in our midst. So going on to the agenda, I'm going to briefly overview the agenda and then get into it. The report on planning activities to date will be based a lot on the letter to the congregation that I sent to you just this last Friday, but there are some developments since that time. The analysis of options, I said in the letter to the congregation that we didn't feel we had enough information to proceed with decision making. However, I think you need to know what the basis of that decision making has been up until this point, so we'll go over those three options. And then you will have a decision presented before you, and I'll explain more about that as we go along. So with respect to our planning activities to date, in my letter of the 4th, I told you that we didn't think we could make a decision in large part because we expected that any opportunity to continue was being frustrated by state regulations that said we were going to have to make significant building modifications before we could do anything with childcare in a new license. That was the state of affairs on Thursday night when I wrote that. On Friday, Dan Wagner and I both had discussions with people in the Department of Public Safety that indicated, in fact, we do have options, even though we've been previously told by them and others we didn't. So the analysis that we're showing you is based on the assumption that whatever we do would not be hindered by excessively burdensome costs of physical improvement of the plant. I won't get into the detail on what those possibilities are and how they came about. But just so you know, that issue that we thought had been settled as of Thursday was alive again on Saturday. We had a special meeting of the work group, as many as could make it, on Friday to try to come to grips with that, and the work that we're giving, or the information we're giving you today, is based largely on that. So let's move to analysis of the options. Well, we've got a what happened up there. I think we've been through that in an earlier presentation. I would just say that this just details how we got the process set up to respond to this. Next slide. What has been done so far? Well, this is just a continuation of what we told you last week in the adult forum. The work group and the finance committee have been looking at the options. We've continued discussions with and about healthcare management, the Caterpillar manager. We have people who have done preliminary work on the license application. However, that's been on hold pending the results of this meeting. And we've continued to gather information. And I should point out that in the packet that we handed out, which you folks online don't have at this time, we have some excellent work done by Dan Wagner, who has done a lot of this kind of program development stuff in the past, and he knows how to search for information that will support a decision. So let's see, what is that? That's the blue sheet. And I just want you to be aware that analysis of Dan's is out there. We've been looking at it. It's been shared among the work group. So in case you're wondering if we've looked at demand for childcare, we have. We will continue to. We don't have anything definitive on it, but this kind of shows our homework. Other things that will suggest what we've been doing, if you look at the pink sheet, the pink sheet is a list of suggestions that Karen Josephson made on how we would present information to you. Again, I'm not going to go through that in detail now. It's for your reference later. If you have a chance to look at it now, that's fine, but the people online haven't had that chance. There are several points, but you can see that we have been looking at the income side of things, the mission side of things, looking for partners in childcare if we decided to go ahead, etc. And finally, the yellow sheet is a comprehensive list, I should say. This is quite a list that Chris Thornton developed to help the work group and finance committee look at all the questions that might need to be answered. He's got 9 categories with several points underneath. And I'm showing you this or telling you about it basically so that you understand the issues we've been working at. So as you raise your questions, understand that they have probably been raised to us before, and if we don't have an answer, we don't. If we do, we'll try to give it to you. But we have been thinking carefully about all these things. Next slide. We have 3 scenarios that we've been talking about. Now, these scenarios are only if, or they only relate to continuing to have childcare at this facility. They do not talk about other uses. We haven't been able to get to that. So, one scenario is that Caterpillar goes away as they plan to, and we search for a new tenant to come in. The second scenario is that Caterpillar closes down and Prince of Peace decides to operate a child care center after Caterpillar is out of the picture. And the third scenario is there an opportunity to transition from the current provider to an operation licensed by Prince of Peace, with Monarch operating under their license until such time as Prince of Peace obtains a license. So those are the three scenarios that we've been looking at. Next slide. Just a background, the financial impact of Caterpillar closing is that we have a decline in revenue of about $80,000 a year, which is about 15% of our operating budget. So hold that thought in your mind. As we analyze this, it was necessary for us to look ahead over like a 2-year timeline to see what the financial impact would be over time, because obviously, you know, it's going to be a big hit right away no matter what we do. Next slide. This is a sample of what happens if a new child care center comes in. You see 2 years up there by quarter, and we have a revenue loss of approximately $20,000 a quarter for the first year, because it's going to take that long for a new operator to get licensed and come in. Now, this is just a best guess. We don't know. Conceivably, it could be sooner. Conceivably, it could be quite a bit later. We don't know. But this is sort of a middle-of-the-range scenario where it's going to take at least a year for that operator to get licensed and begin to pay us rent. And that for the first quarter of the year, that rent isn't going to be enough to keep us from losing money. But by the second quarter of year 2, again, this is just a guess, we think they could be providing rent at approximately the same level that Caterpillar is now in relation to our budget. Next slide. If we were to close down Caterpillar, or Caterpillar were to close down, and we were to become licensed to operate our own after they had closed down, we would probably incur all the loss of revenue that we have now for at least 3 quarters. We know that quarters 1 and 2 are going to be a loss for sure. Quarter 3, probably. Quarter 4, we begin to pick things up. And by the fourth quarter of the second year, we would be in the black. There are a lot of assumptions that go into this, and before I go much further, I should say that Rick Rothhausen, who has spearheaded our effort on the work group, is an accountant, has a lot of experience, projecting. He knows how to build a budget model. He has an extremely detailed, comprehensive model that is based on what kind of assumptions we have about enrollment, about liability insurance, about staffing levels, about operating costs, you name it. He's got a number in there. You would glaze over if you looked at those spreadsheets, and I would stutter if I had to try to explain them to you. But just understand the work in the background is there. And those of you who have a mind to dig into a spreadsheet and help with the budgeting process for anything we do in this church, and help Rick with his treasurer function, and help all of us with our financial, guesswork, hey, join the process, because it's a special kind of breed that can do a good spreadsheet like that and make the numbers, stand out for people. Next slide. This is what happens if we proceed a transition from Monarch to Prince of Peace. This is a scenario that would involve providing incentives to Monarch to continue operating the Caterpillar Center until such time as we could become licensed and assume those operations. That's the broad stroke. There are a lot of details to be worked out and a lot of things to negotiate. But taking our best guess at all the assumptions behind that, here's what that would look like. We're going to lose everything plus in the first quarter. And the first quarter, by the way, these are starting now. So this is essentially the last quarter of our program year is the first quarter of this model. So this is from April to June, or to July. But because we believe that Caterpillar, if they continue operating, and if we provide some assistance in terms of helping them recruit families, provide assurance to families, and some other things yet to be determined, we can mitigate that loss by Caterpillar building back some of their revenue. Bear in mind, they're operating without paying rent. So our net loss in rent is less in quarter two. By quarter three, really, we would have taken over under the best circumstances, but we're still going to be operating at a loss compared to where we are now as we ramp up. So by quarter four of year two, quarter three and quarter four, we are in the black. We're starting to make some money. Now, those are all based on assumptions about how enrollment happens, about what kind of services we're licensed to provide, about availability of staffing and levels of compensation, all that sort of thing. But this is our best guess as to what the financial impacts would be. Next slide. So here they are arrayed together. So the transition from Monarch to POP over a 2-year period, compared to our current levels of operating budget, we would be down about 86,000 something. For us to restart after Caterpillar closes, we would be down over that same period about 101,000. And if a new tenant comes in to operate the child care center, that loss over the 2-year period would be about $81,000. So how do we look at that? How do we compare those numbers? Well, on first glance, if you look at the bottom lines, it looks like the best course of action would be to simply sit it out, let Caterpillar close, and try to find a new tenant if we decide to continue child care. However, if we do that, we are locked in perpetuity to a couple of things. One, we're at the mercy of an operator who could pull out, just like Caterpillar did. And two, beyond whatever rent we are able to get, we have no incentive or no opportunity to increase revenue from that operation to the church. The other thing about that scenario is we don't really have any idea if it's realistic to expect that level of rent from a new operator. One of the operators that we have been in discussions with, the Lake Discovery Center, I think, or whatever it is, Lake Area Discovery Centers, big operation, does a lot with churches, but when they go into a church, they do it in partnership. And a lot of the churches that are in partnership with them don't get anything from them. They basically contribute space. So the assumption that we would be able to get an operator who would pay us that level of rent is pretty iffy. So look at that 81 number. You think it looks good at first, but there's a lot of contingencies there. If you look at the operation to, or the bottom line of restarting after the Caterpillar Center closes, the 101 doesn't look necessarily all that great. That's a pretty big loss. On the other hand, beyond that 2-year time frame, you see, we should be operating in the black. And I would refer you back to the stuff that Dan Wagner has done on demand. You know, the fact is that childcare is a desperately short commodity in this world. We have expansion in Roseville that brings in a lot of child-age families, pre-K age families. There is pretty much no question in the minds of people who have looked closely at the data that the demand will be there. Now, the costs and complexities of running a child care center are part of the reason why there is such demand. It's hard to build up that capacity. But if we did, we could realistically expect to continue a fairly positive revenue flow, or at least not a burden on the church. The transfer from Monarch to Prince of Peace is similar. beyond that 2-year time frame, we would be operating with the strong possibility of continuing to offset our revenue losses and gain some. So, next slide. Considering all these things, the members of the work group who met Friday, in consultation with each other over email for the next day or two, crafted a motion that authorizes preservation of the option to continue services with Monarch during a transition phase. That is to say that option is dead unless we feel that the congregation supports it. So that will be the central question to debate at this meeting. Let me read it. Prince of Peace affirms, excuse me, I'll get my own copy so I'll have to crane my neck here, wherever I got it. Prince of Peace affirms that daycare is a ministry consistent with our mission. As such, the congregation authorizes the council and its designees to continue negotiation with Caterpillar Learning Center to carry on providing daycare services to area families through June 30th, 2022, or until such time as operations can be transferred to another licensed operating entity. That is a motion. You don't see a mover or a seconder here. I believe Rick wants to move that, would you? So, motion, Rick Rothhausen. Do I hear a second? Second, Deb Cordes. So now we're open for discussion, and I'm first going to give the floor to Rick to talk a little bit more about this. Rick, you probably should come up here, maybe. Okay. Why don't you go there, because then I can moderate the discussion here.
Let's see if, can anybody hear me? No? I don't, nothing. Can we take the mask off? I like that. Is that any better? Yeah. Okay, can you tell me to leave it off for the rest of the day? No. Okay. Yeah, this has been somewhat a frantic situation. We don't have an option of not taking a financial hit. So now I'm going to refrain from making it any more complex. There are a few numbers up there. It was suggested that when we, if we were to just close down, we would save some money for janitorial supplies and things like that. I forgot to put that in. That was an oversight. I knew about it. I was juggling a lot of numbers. But I believe that we can perform this service to the community extremely effectively. And what hasn't been handed out, and I don't know if it's going to get handed out, I stated at the bottom of my analysis that I believe that the daycare can, going forward, after two years are going to be a financial struggle. But going forward, I believe that the daycare will be able to pay back that 80 whatever thousand it was up there. And that I just wanted to get that ore in the water before we close out here. And I guess my role is to try to answer some questions. And I will try to do that. While you guys are thinking about questions.
I'll moderate the question. So Scott Tunseth, can you?
Okay, testing. There we go.
Take your mask off.
Oh, okay. Question about insurance. I know you hint at it in some of the material, and you probably dived into this a little bit, but if Prince of Peace were to take over, would we be responsible, or would we want to do health insurance, for instance, for the people who are staffing the center.
Okay, let me take that part, and if you have more, I'm not good at remembering complex questions. So I have, in the work that I'm not trying to subject anybody to, but in all of this work, I have built in 25% for fringe benefits. I envision that we would be employing people at a minimum of $15 an hour and higher for teachers, and that there would be 25% on top of that for a fringe benefit package, which I think would cover health insurance, and I'm hoping 401k and some things like that. So that has been, what you asked raised another question to me, because operating a business is a risky situation, as has been pointed out, and we will be exploring the best way to do this. There are a couple. We could operate as a, I guess you'd call it a fund of the church, like liquor stores for cities where they don't have public sale of liquor. They have a fund that operates a liquor store, and that fund is separate from the city, and they buy insurance to protect them from business losses and things like that. So this would be structured so that the operation of the daycare would not financially impact the congregation, other than the budgets that we've discussed.
Can I just make a point here that our assumption, I think this is unanimous in the work group, is that everything we do with respect to the daycare operations is kind of walled off from the church. That is to say, it has to be a separate management structure, it has to be a separate insurance structure, and so forth. Again, if this motion were to pass, you would be essentially delegating to the council and the authority to determine if we've reached a plausible, feasible deal in the best interest of the church. So we're not going to go ahead no matter what the costs are. We're going to use the judgment of your governing council.
Towards that end, through this process, I've made a number of visits to the daycare center. And when he says walled off, I'm not sure I really like that. I got a tremendous bang out of walking into those classrooms and having a bunch of little kids jump up and introduce themselves to me and dancing around and whatnot. And I said, "I'm Rick," and they said, "Hi, Rick." And I mean, I intend to get a daycare license and do some part-time work in there, so. Walled off, I think.
That's probably the wrong choice of words. I meant just for the management and.
I agree with walled off.
What we're saying basically is that it would not impact other ministries in the church, except as those ministries thought that collaboration was in the interest of the mission. Peter.
I just want to let the folks online know that if they have a question, they can put it in the chat. Like Linda Olson has. I'll share her question in just a moment. But if you're struggling to find the chat, Jen, just keep your hand up and I'll try and recognize you, and we'll see if we can plug in your audio. The question from Linda is, has anyone been in consultation with Lutheran Church of the Resurrection? I think they faced some issues when they were in their remodeling process. I'm not sure of the details, but heard a little bit of this from a member of their congregation.
Does anyone in the work group, has anyone had those contacts? I don't believe so. We have had some contacts with other churches.
I visited Shepherd of the Hills, which operates a daycare, and Shepherd of the Hills chooses to charge that off as ministry. They do not receive any rent. So when their daycare breaks even, it's a piece of cake. In talking to Janet Miller, who's the executive director of Lakes Area Discovery Center, it took a long time for me to get that right. They go in partnership, as Michael has said, with congregations, and I think they have various ways of doing it. I also, from what I've gathered, believe they may be the Cadillac child care business in Minnesota. And they have told us that if they came in here, we would be slower on our recovery than you're talking about up there, Michael. It would take them a year and a half to even start up here, probably. And there would be significant capital expenditures had to be made.
There are a couple of pathways that we're pursuing, but we don't have information from yet. One is that the Minnesota Association of Child Care Centers, I think that's what they're called, has given me some resources for technical assistance, and so we could get some technical assistance in a startup phase or in a transition phase. In addition, we've been encouraged to reach out to the Synod and see what other churches have similar models. We will be pursuing that if this motion passes. Peter.
Question from Steve or Tony Spam, wondering about words that have implied some, quote, profit or income generation. How does that align with our nonprofit and tax-exempt status?
I'll take that. I think a nonprofit is allowed to retain earnings against future operations and so forth. So it isn't actually profit, it's a retained earnings thing. Am I right, Rick?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. I was composing my own answer.
The question was, what are we allowed to profit from something if we're operating?
Yeah, there are federal and state regulations on how much a nonprofit can operate a business and make money, and the profits would be limited. I think, personally, answering the question from a personal standpoint, I'm looking forward to wrestling with those kinds of things, because one of the things that I look forward to doing if we are operating with surpluses is offering scholarships to families of moderate income so that their kids could come here at a reduced cost, and you know, if we're successful enough, maybe some of them could come here at no cost. But that's down the road. I anticipate wrestling with those problems in year 3, frankly.
Okay, we have Jean.
Thank you.
Jean Knock.
Jean Canuck. Okay, first of all, thank you to Rick for having such a good eye on figuring out all of this stuff, and also to Karen and Chris Thorne. Now, I know something about this stuff, so I want to fill you in a little bit. Before I came to Prince of Peace, I was involved in an ecumenical thing up north where the 3 major churches, not the Missouri Synod, they don't work, you know, they wouldn't work with us. And the church across the street, the church that was closest actually to my house, they were losing all of their kids. So the ministers got together and they said, well, you know, what can we do? And they determined that in this town, which was a county seat town, there was no gay care center, there was no infant care, you know, it was just in somebody's house, and there was no preschool program. And, you know, the offshoot of all of this is I ended up as the president of that board for many years. And it's still operating. I just saw the big anniversary thing they sent out. So this can be done and it can work. And there was no monetary kind of deal for making money on this because, you know, this was a little lower income town and we needed to pay the church's expenses for having that level. Okay. Then I came here and Pastor Rice had a meeting where the clergy were meeting with the city of Roseville to find out what we can do to work cooperatively. And so then he talked to me, and I was president of the congregation then, and he talked to me and he said, well, you know, I said Lake Ridge is so close, I'll go talk to them. So came back and said Lake Ridge has a real problem with daycare for their kids. And that's kind of where this started. Prior to that time, there had been a short-term Montessori school here, but as you know, Montessori schools need only like a 1-to-10 ratio, and it's just a preschool program. But then at that time, the church pitched in because we decided to do this, and we got some grant money from Lake Ridge, I think from their foundation, and I don't know where else. Because as you know, we didn't have water down in that end of the building and all of that kind of stuff which you had to have. Okay. And now, but at that time, the church saw it as as a mission on their part to provide the daycare, and if I recall, and we don't have very good record ever, but if I recall, the rent, so to speak, or the rent, so to speak, was under $20,000, because the idea was that it would be something where we would not incur any expenses, but that we would be receiving rent. Now, over the years, as you can see, it's gone up a great number of times. But as I said, at that time, it was part of the mission. We did not, now, and I have to I hate to say this, but I was the one that said, you know what, I can't do another one of these, meaning doing a local one in the church, because nobody else was stepping forward that knew anything else about it, okay? So then we used an outside contractor. So we did not get some of the things we wanted, like the foster grandparent program, where the grandparents come in and sit and rock the kids, and there were some other kinds of things like that we didn't get. But I just kind of wanted you to have some background on where this came from, and this has been a pretty good thing over the years, but there's no question that there's going to be a monetary thing going forward, because I can't imagine anybody renting and paying in that kind of money going forward, since the salaries have had to go up so much higher, and it becomes part of the church sitting down and figuring out just where we are, where our expenses are, and what we do. But I just wanted to give you some background. I know a few of you have done
Jean, are you speaking in favor or opposed?
I am speaking in favor of doing something.
Okay, thank you. I
am
thought
not
you were, but I
Sarah-
wasn't sure, and I wanted, okay,
Everything else, but I'm speaking definitely in favor of doing something.
thank you.
Thank you to all the people that you said thank you to.
For those of you online, with Marge,
I'm sorry, what?
I'm just introducing you. Marge Bovo is.
Bove. I'm looking around here, and I'm seeing so many wonderful faces that I haven't seen in a long time. But you know what? Most of you look like me. I'm 75 years old. I'm an old bride. Okay?
Hey, you're just a kid from my standpoint.
I understand. I want to talk about the elephant in the room. Before that, in terms of daycare, of course it's a need. No one will disagree with that. A question I would have in terms of, is $15 an hour? I can see that slave labor on that, but that's a whole other issue that I don't even want to get into. Even that is even worse, okay? However, I personally don't want to be associated with any group that does that. However, that's, again, not my issue. I want to talk about the elephant. The elephant is, since 10 years ago, we are 100 families less than we were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were 295 families. I say that because I have 3 directories, and I spent the last few days counting how many families were in each of these directories. In talking earlier to Pastor Peter, and then at last September in our meeting, I was told we have about 200 families. What are those 200 families? Here's what we don't know. We don't know how many of those 200 families are names only. For example, Betchen Overdorfer's daughter, Erin, is on that list. Erin doesn't give to the church. Erin doesn't come to the church. She may come maybe once a year. I suspect there are other people like her on our list. How many families with children are on that list? I personally know, because I've had the conversation, we are having families that are leaving. We have families with 1 foot out the door. I asked how many kids are in our children's program, and the number Pastor Peter guessed for me was an educated guess, about 30. There's a phrase in education called critical mass. I don't think that's a critical mass. I think what we have not addressed over years is, what is our membership? What are we doing to grow our membership? the building. We voted on fixing the roof, which, by the way, we've had a bucket list going for that for over 10 years. All of a sudden, it's a real issue now. But I've not heard anything about the rest of the building. Shouldn't we know the physical condition of this entire building before we do something like the roof or anything else?
Marge, I suggested that the leaky roof would be our answer to a sprinkler system if we had one.
Thank you.
We got to lighten it up a little, folks. Smile and...
Yeah, well, I just want to, what I want to say is, we cannot look at this without addressing these other things. We may not be here in 10 years. We may not be here in 5 years. We are overstaffed. 10 years ago, when I did research for Anita, no, I'm going to finish.
Well, would you give me a sense of how much more time you need?
A minute.
Okay.
10 years ago, when I did some research about relationship of pastors to congregation, we were on the cusp. In other words, we could have 1 or 2 pastors, and that's when we were 300 people, 300 families, household in our congregation. We are far underneath that. We're well under 200, I imagine, but we don't know, and we need to get all that information before we can do any of this. So no, I'm not in favor of, I will not vote on anything. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Marge.
Thank you for your time.
I'm going to respond because Marge gives me a segue into a part of the agenda that I didn't talk about, but you see it on there, which is leadership renewal. You'll see on your agenda that we plan to have a leadership renewal workshop on May 14th. This kind of flows from the Liberating Structures process, so we wanted our mission leaders to get together and rethink how we do things. But it's also a broader planning effort. And I agree with Marge that it would be best if we could consider this particular choice in the light of all the other things that are going on. As a professional planner for 30 years, I can tell you that is not a process that can be undertaken in a 3-week time frame, and there's no way that we could have had an intelligent debate about it. So what we tried to do was carve off the first question, which is whatever the long-term prospects for revitalizing this church based on our mission, vision, and values, and I want to stress that. I want to put in a plug for getting in those workshops in Lent, because what other congregational leaders have found is when you clarify your mission and can communicate it to the world, when you live by your values and you have a vision for where the Holy Spirit is leading you, things happen. Now, my question to you is, whatever the prospects are for us revitalizing this church in terms of membership, would those prospects be increased or diminished by having a self-supporting daycare operation here? Would we be better off in 5 years if we could show the world that we were a family caring organization by having child care here? Or would we be better off if we retrenched, confined our services and tried to promote our membership traditionally through, whatever? I don't know. And I can't say. But you can, but you have to be part of the process. I encourage all of you, and I will again when this debate is over, to think about how you want to live out the mission of Prince of Peace and join us in that workshop on May 14th. Okay.
I have a question that goes back to the beginning of this. In the conversations that the committee has had with Monarch, I guess I don't understand the reason that they're leaving. Is it a financial issue with them? Is it disfavor with the facility? Is the rent too high? I don't understand why they're leaving, and if they are leaving, why they would be interested in continuing on until we would take it over. If they're losing money, they lose more money, so I don't quite understand what their reason for leaving is. Is there anybody that could explain that
I
to
have
us?
to nod at Michael because he's scared to death that I'm going to say something that offends the entire congregation. Pastor Peter, on your message this morning, you were talking about being unbound, and I could just hear the wheels turning in Sandra's head. And she's kind of thinking, you know, he needs more binding, not less binding. So, and now Michael has picked up on that, so he has the right to cut me off at any minute. They're leaving because they have operated this since Monarch has been the owner as a cash cow. They have put no executive effort or training into the staff. They have, okay, I'm repeating something now that I've heard, so I can't swear to this, but I've heard it from a number of people. Monarch was asked before the last pay raise, or the last price increase went in on the daycare center, can most of that money go to the staff? And Monarch said, yeah, we're okay with doing that. So they put in a 5% increase. Turns out they lied to the people. None of it went to the staff. Now, that's one incident, but multiply that over, I don't know how many years they've been running this place, but I think they're closing because of executive failure, personally.
I would add that Monarch is a large healthcare management organization that operates primarily nursing homes, as I understand it, and that they are, I believe they are a subsidiary of United Healthcare now. So this is kind of a business. This is like Ford closing a plant because they're moving their operations, or a big conglomerate selling off a company because it's not part of their core business anymore.
I have to follow up on that. Just a minute.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but
Go ahead, Rick.
they're running a business without a mission, Chris. Their mission was to make deposits at the end of every month. And they let it be by itself, and they were making deposits for a while. They've lost staff over a long period of time because of lack of mission and lack of really, I think, any support at all.
Okay, I think we'll go to the
Recently,
go to the Zoom.
just one
now,
more thing. Recently,
quickly.
the last year, they've been operating substantially with temporary people who cost
Let's
them
move back.
more than qualified people would have to earn in order to work for the center. And I think the reason is total incompetence as far as operating this
Rick,
business.
I'm going to cut you off.
Thank you.
We're going to the Zoom.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but also a couple of comments. I think I'll share two comments quickly and then ask one of the questions. The first comment is from Elizabeth Asleson, who says, I agree with Marge. I don't feel comfortable voting about this issue, not knowing what the actual state of the church is. And then Barb Burkhart says, something to reflect on is that we have had a child care present in our building, and has that attracted families to membership? So that's just a statement.
Okay.
A question from Martina Ashworth. How does the 80,000 deficit get rectified in a scenario where we continue operating a daycare?
Okay.
Can I take that? Okay. First of all, not included in this discussion so far is the whole question, as Marge suggests, of do we need to cut our operating expenses or increase our giving? You know, we're going to have to do both or one or the other, no matter what. So I encourage you to think in your own heart about what God is calling us to do as a church. Can we be more effective in doing God's work by retrenching and getting smaller? And as Rick likes to call it circling the drain, because if you kind of buy into a perpetual cycle of reduction and reduction, it can be very negative. Or do you think we can weather this for a period of time? We're looking at a 2-year time frame to see if boldly stepping into the work that God calls us to do, we can revitalize this whole church. Now, I don't know the answer to that, and this vote will not be determinative of that because there are other things that are going to have to happen soon down the road. But your question for you is, are we more likely to be able to do that if we have a revenue-neutral daycare operation in the building or not? Now, I say revenue neutral, I don't mean that it's going to be revenue, it's going to be a loss no matter what right away. You saw the scenarios. But the operation of the daycare center is not going to affect the long-term operation in a revenue sense if we're successful in negotiating any one of these options. Let's see, who do we have now? Okay.
Hi, I bet.
Actually, Mark, the question asker,
Oh, okay.
chime in.
Okay, go ahead.
Follow-up, and I think we can get around. Go ahead, Martina. Yeah, Martina, you need to unmute. There we go.
Sorry, that was Michael that texted. I was asking if I can make a comment on point. I don't think Martina has.
I guess I just don't understand how we make up for it. Obviously, there's things that need to happen with the budget, giving, but that's a lot of money. And if the next people coming in, however, isn't going to be.
I'm not necessarily right now. I just don't know logistically how this works. And I know it's a big one. I don't know that it is, but I don't know yet.
Very rare question.
Gretchen had a question first, I think.
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Yes.
Well, I have a couple of comments and then a question. Those of you who know me know that I've always been very mission-oriented. Also, I've also been a person who felt that a church should not sit on money, that we bring in money and we need to use it. And I say that because there is money in the church that the church has that could be used in emergencies or for whatever. And I'm talking about memorials and that kind of things that have been given to the church for the church's use that are undesignated, okay? And I say that because I do not feel that the daycare as we have had it now has been a mission. If it were a Head Start type program, if it was a subsidized program, if we weren't making money off it to cover some of our expenses as a budgeted thing, then I could see it as mission. But I don't see it as we're doing it now as mission. And the concern that I have too is the rush. This happened to us, we got a quick fill in, we got to do something. I don't know why we can't take the $80,000 from the more than $500,000 that are in the memorials, just have been sitting there for a long time, that will get us through a year, and we really can sit down and take a look at what really would fit our mission, what really we should be doing, and not rush into, oh my gosh, we've got a crisis, we've got to fill this gap, and do that. And I was waiting for you to say this, Jean, where's the data? Where's the data that says how many daycares are in Roseville? Is there a need for that? Is there a need for low-income daycare? Or what are some of the other needs? Are there other things that we could use this for? So,
A couple of points on that. Thank you. All issues that the work group and council have been wrestling with. Let me just talk to the reason, the why now reason. This is nothing more than our attempt to preserve options for you to consider, which is to say, if we did not present this option to you today, you would not have the option of continuing one possible favorable scenario to allow child care services to continue until we operated it. That's the reason for the urgency. Because their occupancy ends March 15th unless something changes. Most of their staff is down and so forth. So a decision to vote against this particular motion is not a decision to eliminate looking at other possibilities. In fact, as I just indicated, all the planning work on other options and, more importantly, the mission of this church, what are we really called to do and what resources should we present to it, all that stuff is going to continue, and rather rapidly, I hope. So that's the reason for the urgency. You know, this is in the view of Rick, for sure, and there's been a lot of discussion. All of us have some apprehension about whether this would succeed, but I can assure you that voting for this motion would simply authorize the council to continue seeing if it can be worked out. It does not commit us to taking a loss. It doesn't commit us to necessarily following through with a license if that doesn't look feasible. It simply empowers your council to use their judgment to move ahead if this option looks good. Peter?
The question from Barry, which, and to share later on, he added another comment saying he strongly agrees with Betchen on mission and speed. But the question was, the first sentence of the motion assumes childcare is part of POP's mission. That was true at one time. Thanks for the valuable history, Gene. And have we, as a congregation, recommitted to childcare as part of our mission today? Is the question.
Well, as you may recall, I've written 2 letters to the congregation on this, and the first one was envisioning a kind of a decision tree where that was the first question. Does the congregation support child care as a mission? I guess that right now it's sort of implicit in this motion that if you pass the motion, you agree with that assumption. That assumption was phrased by a group of people. Rick had an initial motion, but it was revised based on the input of several people. So a vote on the motion would agree with that assumption that it is still a part of the mission. It may not be. I don't know what your will is.
Amount of designated money that
Repeat the question just because it didn't come through.
Maisie's question is, do we have a large amount of money undesignated in the congregation?
I'm going to throw that
Best answer to that would be from
Chris Thornton, who's done work on that most recently. Can you pull those numbers off the top of your head?
Well, I mean, the biggest...
I hate designated funds.
I mean, obviously, the biggest portion is the Diesler gift that we're sitting on, right, which is in the neighborhood of $700,000. We also have, you know, combined accounts in that dedicated area that exceed that, but that's stuff that's largely been earmarked for, you know, building improvements, the roof and things like that. So it's savings for those future projects. But there are some memorials and other amounts in, you know, that could be potentially devoted to these if they weren't, you know, previously dedicated.
Is it a large amount, or is it just?
Well, 700 plus.
700,000.
So that's.
I don't mean rows.
Don't mean rows. Yeah, outside.
Just memorials. Just memorials.
Yeah,
I imagine that there are.
yeah, less than 10,000 probably memorials.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you know, if you borrow from those things, you're generally taking away from the building improvements and things we need to also, you know, have that money available for as well. So, you know, having said that, I mean, was it Betchen's comment, take the loss and essentially borrow from those accounts, just like we did for the driveway and things like that. You could do that to buy yourself time to put something in place, right? and then ideally pay that back at a future date.
Do we get a lot of memorials that are just undesignated so that they do stand unused?
It's sort of it depends. Typically, larger gifts are designated.
Yeah.
Smaller gifts come undesignated. So that's why there's less than 10,000 in undesignated memorial funds. So. Well, Marge's gonna look it up. But yeah. Anyways.
No, I'm going to show this.
The money is restricted.
The
If it's undesignated, it's designated.
it.
It can go in undesignated.
Okay. Huh? Thank you.
I fought that fight at the last congregation that
so the lion's share, so Marge is pointing at a line in our on our balance sheet, or our dedicated funds, excuse me. No, this is our balance sheet. Yeah, she's pointing a line on our balance sheet that shows that of our assets that are technically without donor restrictions, they total $583,547 and change.
of which 445 is Rose.
So the lion's share is $465,000 of truly undesignated money remaining from the Diesler estate. So that would be the bulk of that. And then within that, there are things like the undesignated memorial funds, a few things. Anything that's been given to the music ministry is a designated gift. Anything that's been given to the building fund is designated, and it wouldn't show up in that total.
But that 500,000 includes Rose's.
465,000 of Rose's money. Yeah.
Okay, Trish?
I just have one. I know we're talking. Sorry, I'm not used to this. I just have one comment, and that's I had my daughter, who is now an adult, but when she was in preschool, I had one, and then I had a different one, and then we moved, and we had a third one. And by far, the best school that she went to was a Lutheran. Actually, it was a Missouri Lutheran, but they were very careful about those differences. And I just think that we have the opportunity to make it more valuable for the church and the community if some of the people in the church are involved. The kids.
Thank you. Peter?
I have another comment from someone online, and I'm hoping that the person who makes this comment will identify themselves because their screen name is admin. And I've asked, and so if you're listening and this is your comment, please let us know who you are. I agree with Marge as well. We are overstaffed and are not attracting new members at a realistic rate. The current daycare does not attract new members as we have not had the opportunity to interact with the daycare. As Rick was commenting, this is an opportunity to achieve that goal by bringing the teachings of the daycare to a flavor of our mission. And then Karen Carr offers this. There is no urgency other than deciding how to plan and move forward as a church body. Sometimes it takes a sense of urgency to move forward. This motion is part of planning, and we must all have a voice in it. So thank you to all who are contributing their thoughts, concerns, and hopes. She adds, getting the physical building in shape is in line with the license regulations to continue offering childcare. And Karen Josephson also has some comments. Karen's wanting to connect with her audio. We'll give it another shot. We'll see how it goes.
Hi, everybody. This is Karen. Am I echoing in there?
Good here.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, my comments are coming from a place of both a congregation member and also as the person who pays the bills and records the deposits. On Friday, I went in to pay the bills, and that was around about the time that a lot of the parents were picking up their daycare. And I was overhearing a lot of the conversations. In some cases, it was the last time the parents were picking their children up. You were hearing things like, say goodbye, school. A lot of conversations with the teachers. What are you going to do next? I heard expressions that I hope they can figure out a way to make this work because we really love it here. So that, that tells me that there's a heart for the ministry and the mission that we have here. I, being generally a bit of a cautious person, I am a little bit apprehensive about the speed, but I also am cautiously optimistic. I also want to respond to, Marge's very legitimate concerns. I think one of the things that we need to think about is we are hopefully reaching the end of a pandemic. This has been hard on everyone. There's studies after studies. It's been a challenge because we're in person and then we're not, and then we're together. And I think right now we don't necessarily have a true picture of what we really are. And so I would hate to make a hasty decision, especially about staffing, when right now we simply don't know. I'm optimistic with this church. I went back and took a look at just the portion of the Prince of Peace income that comes in through church members to tithes and Ruth's offering. And even though, as was stated, the membership numbers appear to be flat, our generous congregation members are not reflecting that. I started at 2017, and the amount has increased every year, not by huge amounts, but the amount has increased. Some of the assets that we have are a group of dedicated volunteers. We have people that are giving every week. 40% of our donations come from our online giving, which helps us flatten out. In addition, we have more and more of our congregation members who are in the unique financial situation where they can give part of their required minimum distributions, qualified charitable deductions, donor advised funds, assets of appreciated stock. There's been people who give in a lot more different ways. And I've seen the generosity of this congregation come through time and time again. And volunteers, my goodness, when you take a look at the creativity of the pastors and the volunteers, what's been done with the video to get people in, I don't feel like this congregation is in a hopeless position. I see a lot of hope. And I see us a real opportunity here to really take a look at what our mission is. How can we use that daycare space to really bring in people? We've talked about affordable housing. We also know there's a need for affordable daycare. There's a large affordable housing complex that's going in next to Byerly's. There's opportunities there. I know Dan Wagner has done a lot. I've been amazed and impressed by the energy that this work team has put together in coming up with all kinds of questions and ideas and dreams in just a short period of time frame. So I would challenge us as a congregation to really think about what's God calling us to do here and now. How can we look at from a position of abundance that God is calling us to give, and that so many of you have shown time and time again to be willing to do. Prince of Peace, God is doing some wonderful things at Prince of Peace. I don't see opportunity in this for despair. 80,000, that's a lot, but that's 15% instead of 85%. We have cash reserves that, there's certain portions of it that we'd prefer not to borrow from, but we're coming from a good position of reserves that can help us see through this while we come up with something. So I just want to say how much I appreciate all the thoughts and the perspectives of here, how much I love this congregation and truly want to see it go. And I see only possibilities and good things ahead for us. God is not finished with us yet. So thank you, everybody.
At this point, I'm just going to pause for a second. We're running, we're a little over an hour and 20 minutes or so. And I don't want to cut anybody off from expressing a viewpoint, but I just kind of want to get a sense of how much longer you'd like to go with this before we call the question. Online, do you have a lot of other comments waiting?
No questions, just a quick rundown of some comments I still haven't figured out who the longer comment came from, but I'm going to trust that it was somebody who's a member of the congregation. After Karin just spoke now, actually I'm going to go back. After Betchen spoke, Barb Burkhardt added, I agree, Betchen, running a child care center is expensive and difficult work. This is something we should not rush into. And then, I do have a question, I guess. So I'll get that one in just a second. But some responses to Karin. Thank you, Karin, for the half-full glass of optimism. And Asita Sandanayaka weighs in. This is wonderful, Karin. Guess I was wrong. Thanks for your comments. About sound. And Martina wants to try and give that a shot again to try and speak again. And Barry has a question. Assuming passage, what dollar amount is needed to fulfill it? If the amount is greater than 20% of annual operating budget, my understanding is the motion needs to state it so there's no question later.
Well, I would say our interpretation of that has been that the amount needed to fulfill it does not exceed the losses which we're trying to mitigate. So the net effect on it is nothing but positive. Therefore, it does not require us to meet that threshold in the Constitution. That's my interpretation. I would, if anybody wants to challenge that, that's fine. But we had hoped to have a written ballot just to make sure that you understood that it was a binding vote like the Constitution requires for that kind of a budget question. We are not technically able to do that, so we will just have a show of hands. If you believe that it is a constitutional question, we would, I guess, need to find an interpretation on that. If no one objects, we'll proceed without that interpretation.
Gary's been waiting to ask.
Gary?
Oh. I forgot. No. Even with hearing aids, I miss a lot of stuff, so if I repeat something that others have said, please forgive me. Gene and I joined here in 2008, and we love it here. I have never once heard the daycare referred to as a mission. That doesn't mean no one has done that, but I haven't heard it in the years that we have been here. I have heard comments that I have extra income coming in that the daycare provides. So I think this is a good opportunity. This resolution, I think we should pass it because it doesn't nail us down to anything, but it also gives us an option, the leaders, planners, and including us, to make a decision about whether we want to see child care in some form as a mission of our congregation, a vital mission here. So I think it's good from that standpoint. So I would vote for it on that basis. The other thing, I just want to make a comment that's probably out of line, but you have to tell me if it is. I don't know a lot about business. I had a sole proprietorship that I just canceled. And what I want to ask is this: is the present leadership of Caterpillar Daycare Center, are they committed to the Monarch organization so that they will leave because Monarch wants them to leave? Or is it possible that if we take up ownership of the daycare as a congregation, is it possible that if we're satisfied with them, the present Caterpillar leadership, or at least some of them, would stay on to do their leadership role, if we're satisfied with them?
I'm going to take this one, okay? Is that all right? All right. We have not been treating Monarch Daycare as a mission. That's why you haven't heard of it spoken as a mission. It has not been operating as anybody's mission. Does the leadership of Monarch that I described earlier, does that sound like anything that you would be so loyal to that, yeah, I didn't...
I'm talking about Monarch. I'm talking about
Caterpillar?
On the site, teachers and others here.
Okay, we have 3 staff members in the daycare right now. They are all, I believe, qualified to be lead teachers, maybe one of them only a teacher's assistant. They are praying that we take over this because they love their jobs, they love the parents group, and they love the kids. I agree with what Betchen said. We should be a mission-driven church, and I don't know that we are. I mean, I don't know that we've ever decided that we want to be guided by this mission or that mission. I would ask the group, though, would you prefer to be with a church that wanted to develop a mission that felt service to area families and children was part of that mission, and that we do an excellent job of it? That is what's gotten me really excited about this. I mean, I am an accountant. I'm a recovering CPA, all right? But I don't like the number side of the business as much as I like the operation side of the business. That's why I got out of the CPA business several times. This opportunity that this congregation has got me on fire. So that is a full-throated endorsement of doing this. And as the question was asked, what's the hurry? Well, the hurry is that all of a sudden we know we don't have $20,000 a quarter in rent coming in. Is that the right amount? I don't know. Should we try to be making that much? I don't know. My feeling on this is that if we do this, we're going to want to be one of the best daycare centers in the area, and whatever it takes to do that, I'm committed to seeing us try to do that. I would hope that after a year, most people in the congregation would agree with me on that point. A mission of being cautious and trying to get by on a smaller budget, I don't see Jesus endorsing something like that. I mean, I just, I can't believe it. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Deb?
Hi, Deb Cordes. I want to echo what Karen said. My child is a child of this congregation. If it weren't for all of you who were here when he was raised, he was a challenge sometimes. And oftentimes, it was this church that taught him God's love in his most spunky self. I think we always saw the daycare as mission, even though we got lost in the money. There were often times when we would walk in as children were running up and down the hall, and it wasn't stop that in the way. It was, hey, sweetie, how you doing? We showed God's love. And I think if we don't explore possibility. And this vote is about possibility. We might miss the boat in terms of mission. I think this reaffirms a mission that Jean and many of them back then started, but I also think it allows us to imagine in the future. Stop there? I don't think so. But we need to have the flexibility to move forward and at least explore what those options look like for today and tomorrow. And I will tell you, I've taken on the process of licensing. It's an enormous process, and without the support of this motion, I don't know that it's worth putting people 80 hours into a process that we can't even move forward with. So I think we forget how complex it is, and this is possibility.
Thank you. Just a moment.
Dan?
Did you get a Dan?
Yep. As we understand the motion, it's an empowering motion. It's a chance to continue research. As you know, what I did was an environmental scan, which shows an overwhelming need for this. The next stage would actually be visiting the 42 daycare centers within 6 miles of this church to see how they're doing. In other words, do they have waiting lists? Do they want to move ahead? This is an empowering motion. As Deb said, as Karen said, we've got to move forward. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I call for a vote.
Okay, we have a motion second. Okay, let's see, Kurt is our parliamentarian. Do I need any vote on this one to call the question? I can't remember.
You need a vote to call the question.
Pardon me?
By Robert's rules, you need a vote to call the question. And then you need a vote on the question.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
Okay, the question's been called. Put the motion back up. We have paper copies available in the sanctuary. We've got the motion up to, Peter, can you see if the online people need any more time to read it, reflect?
No one's frantically waving. There were a number of other comments and a couple of questions posed, but yeah.
Okay. Well, the question has been called, so we're... Okay, I'll read the motion. Motion. Prince of Peace affirms that daycare is a ministry consistent with our mission. As such, the congregation authorizes the council and its designees to continue negotiation with Caterpillar Learning Center to carry on providing daycare services to area families through June 30th, 2022, or until such time as operations can be transferred to another licensed operating entity. That is the motion. And
if we vote yea or for
yes, and a yes is voting in favor, and a no is voting against, and you may abstain. Yes,
are we voting to stop discussion on the question? Are we or are we voting on the motion?
Well, we're voting on the motion. However, I'm not the parliamentarian, so I wasn't sure if we needed a vote on calling the question.
If I might explain here, there are two steps here. One is somebody calling the question. That means they're tired of talking about this and they'd like to proceed.
Right.
And then your response should be, is there any further discussion? So then you would say, hearing none, we would proceed to vote on the motion. So at this point, I think we're at the point where we would vote on the motion.
Okay, the question has been called. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, signify by raising your hand. This is on the motion. Oh, excuse me? This is calling the question? Okay, I need my parliamentarian again. I thought we could just go ahead.
According to Robert's Rules of Election, you have to vote to call the question. Then you vote on the motion is the question.
Okay, well, this is a vote to call the question then. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we're voting on the motion. Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Chair rules that the motion carries. Does anybody want what they, I guess, I've heard it said, does anyone want to call for a division of the House, which would be a count, but do we need a count? Anybody want to call for that?
I have some captured.
Peter is able to count the onlines.
I have 16, 18, they're still voting.
Okay, okay, let's go back in here and we'll get a count, so we've got it registered.
Well,
again, all in favor, would you hold your hands up until we can get them counted? And who's counting?
This is a favor motion. Yeah. I didn't want you to have your hand up back there.
For those who are on Zoom, there is a poll launched on your screen if you haven't responded to it. That's one way we can capture at least some indication of your participation. But holding, yep.
Voting is still open online, but in the meantime, to expedite matters, I'm going to describe the leadership renewal workshop. It's on your agenda. Pardon me?
16.
Okay, and nay?
We have 63.
63 yay? How many?
63 total.
Okay.
And now we've got 27 here plus 16.
Oops.
Okay.
Didn't mean to do that.
We're at majority.
Okay. Well, we can record that vote in the minutes of the count. You know, a lot of this discussion today has been the kind of discussion we need to move forward into our future planning. In January, I kind of previewed an idea of where we were going with the planning, and it's really ambitious because it calls for us developing a new budgeting process, a new configuration of our ministry leaders, new ways that we structure it so that what those leadership groups are in relation to the council. It's a lot of work to do. 2 points for moving into the future, and I'll keep it simple. First, please, if you can, join those conversations that are going to happen prior to our Lenten services. We're going to be talking about values, but the values have to be in relation to our ministries. So begin that discussion of who we are, where you want to go. If you're not a person who feels, or if in case you think that this whole childcare thing just can't work, or if we find out later it doesn't work, what other things, what other passions, and how do your values inform that? And then on May 14th, we're going to host a workshop for our mission leaders. And that is just a way to let anybody who walks into the room feel like they're a leader. I'm not going to designate you are leaders. It's whoever feels called to step up and work towards some mission of this church to be in that process. We're going to have Justin Grimm from the Synod, who's been helping our Liberating Structures project to help facilitate and energize us. And the following day, on May 15th, we're going to have Justin Grimm available for our adult forum. I really hope that this kind of begins the serious work on the kind of questions that Marge and many of you have about how do we find the resources to do what we're supposed to do. But we got to know what we're supposed to do first. With that, We've announced the vote that it carried. And I would invite Pastor Peter to close us in prayer, and with the amen, we are adjourned without objection.
The Lord be with you.
And also with
Let us pray. Direct us, Lord God, in all our doings with your most gracious favor, and extend to us your continual help, that in all our work begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name. And finally, by your mercy, bring us to everlasting life. Through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, who taught us to pray, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. We are adjourned.
depart in peace, or something like that.
God damn it. Okay. I screwed up the whole goddamn thing. I sat for an hour and a half and I couldn't get it done. What a